So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for spending an evening with us. Hopefully you had a nice cocktail and something good to eat, and feel free to step out and grab some more as the evening goes on. Although it's a very short evening, so I don't think you have to feel any pressure like you have to load up. It's only 3 hours. I think everyone can handle it. Well, anyway, thank you all for coming for a night to just hear a little bit more about how things are going out at Sunnydale. Many of you are here, or all of you are here in some way, shape, or form because of your support for our work, and some of you in particular for support around Sunnydale, so we greatly appreciate that. There's a lot of people in the room here who are working in one way, shape, or form with us as partners. You know, first and foremost, our development partner, who's Bill Whitty, who's sitting there at the front table looking inconspicuous, of Related. And we also want to thank Beneficial State Bank for their generosity in sponsoring the event tonight. Thank you very much. So tonight is really quite simple. We're just trying to give you a little bit of information about sort of how things are going, tell you a little bit about sort of the great things we're doing with the money that was generously donated at our gala event. I'm trying to remember how many months ago that was. I'm having memory issues here. You can explain that later. But you know, at our Home is Just the Beginning event, which I think was 4 or 5 months back, many of you contributed to raising $500,000 for the work that we're doing out there. So I want to thank Ford Fish, again, our event chair, for all that work. And many of you here for your generous donations and bringing people to learn a little bit more about us and the work that we're doing collectively out there. We're going to show a little video to kind of give you a little bit of sense of like what's happening on the day-to-day, but there's also a fair amount of folks who work at Sunnydale. If you want to raise your hand if you're one of the staff that... So if you're completely unimpressed by my recounting of this from my distant perspective, you can get the real deal over there. So just as a reminder for some of you that maybe don't remember or don't know all the details, Sunnydale is the largest public housing development in San Francisco, and it's part of a citywide initiative called Hope SF. And Mark Joseph, who's going to tell you a little bit about later, has been advising us on it since the very beginning, before I came to Mercy when I was working for the city. But really, part of what makes Hope SF so unique is part of a broader effort that the mayor and others have led, which is really moving San Francisco from a world in which we have lots of, for lack of a better word, poorly maintained public housing. That I'm working on my diplomacy. I'm trying to get an appointment. No, I'm just kidding. I got a lot of bad jokes that I'm just going to suppress. But over the last several years, really, the entire public housing stock of San Francisco has, for lack of a better word, been non-profitized. And some of it is actually with for-profits, but moving from a situation in which we had really underinvested in public housing and with all the attendant consequences for residents and neighbors to a situation in which that's being moved over to really mission-driven for-profits and nonprofits that are doing a much better job of addressing the needs of residents. And not that the stuff that's happened to date has been easy, but that was the easy stuff, and now the really hard stuff is left. And by hard, I mean buildings that really can't be renovated, neighborhoods that need much more than just paint or a new building, but really need to kind of get the full range of you know, services, great schools, great parks, all the things that all of us want in a neighborhood. And so that's really what Mercy, Related, the Boys and Girls Club, and others are trying to do out at Sunnydale. And so part of what this summer was about was trying to take some of the generous donations that we received in the spring and trying to put them to use. So Drew and others really spent a lot of time getting kids into camp. With some of the money that was donated, 28 kids went to the Boys and Girls Club in Camp Mendocino. So Harold's in the back there. He can tell you all about Camp Mendocino. And if you want to get hooked up with a trip to Camp Mendocino, maybe Harold can set you up. I don't know if you long for bug juice or whatever it is that they serve up there. But our staff really did a great job of getting folks into camps, some of them overnight camps, some of them day camps. We also ran a fabulous program For folks that aren't familiar with Visitation Valley, one of the historic challenges has been getting the different factions in the neighborhood, sometimes called, I don't think they're gangs really, but just factions of kids who eventually end up in situations of violence with each other, to get to know each other before that violence becomes part of their lives. And so this summer, a lot of work was done with kids who are just before that age, to try and connect them with each other, get to know each other, spend time doing things that are totally just normal parts of childhood, whether it's going on a field trip to the beach or an amusement park, but doing it with each other so that the boundaries that kind of sometimes come to exist and create division in Visitation Valley and other neighborhoods aren't there. And so I wasn't there, but I understand it was a huge success, and we've got lots of kids who get to know each other in ways that hopefully 3-5 years from now will arrest the cycle of violence that has really plagued, Visitation Valley and Sunnydale for many years. So again, that was something that really was made possible with some of the generous donations. We're also getting very, very close to breaking ground. Well, actually, Bill's got the first building with the first affordable housing building at Sunnydale. It's right across the street from the existing development. So that's going to start construction in February or January. And that'll be the first 55 units of affordable housing that have been built there. And that'll enable some folks to move out of the first phase. And then eventually we'll move enough folks out of that first phase that we'll really be able to accelerate the process and really get it off the ground. And then it'll really seem spectacular in what's happening out there. This summer, we also had some fantastic small things happen. I saw Jay Cahill here earlier, but the Cahill Construction Company was part of a fabulous event. We did some work, a very simple project around community gardens and renovating community gardens and building new community gardens. But what we were able to do with the Cahill folks, and we'll be able to do later with the folks from NIBI, is use that as an opportunity to introduce folks to the people that will be doing the hiring for construction jobs. So it was a very simple event, but it was a low-key way for people who are interested in construction work to get to know folks from the general contracting companies so that it doesn't seem quite as foreign as they're out there searching for good workforce. And they actually have gotten to know some people who would like to get employed and get out there, which is a huge part of this investment in Visitation Valley. And I want to thank the folks from Cahill. I can't even spot, where's Jay? There he is, he's hiding. But also our friends at NIBI, who I know are going to do the next phase of that. So thanks very much for that. And last but not least, every year for the last several years, we've been part of a group of neighborhood community-based organizations that have gotten together to kind of get kids ready for back to school. So the most visible way this is this giant backpack giveaway, which is quite a logistical challenge, I guess. And this year we were joined by Mayor Lee. You're going to see a little bit about that this year. But we were also really happy to be helped out this year by volunteers from Salesforce and Salesforce.org, who were really helping get involved. We had over 650 parents and kids come out for that back-to-school giveaway, where they met with the mission staff from City College and SF State. And if you're from San Francisco, you might be familiar with Parents for Public Schools, and they were there as well. So we tried to make it more than just a backpack giveaway. So if you're here from Salesforce and you joined us or were part of that event, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand so we can give you a little round of thanks. Okay, George? All right. So small steps, I mean, the big steps are coming, but all of this is about building relationships that enable the bigger steps to occur. There are more people in the room who could tell you more about that detail, but I think rather than keep talking, what I want you to do is see for a second the video. That gives you a little bit more of the feel for the fantastic work that's happening out there, and then I'll come back up and introduce Mark, and we can get into more of a conversation.
We're really excited about the community garden. It brings the community together around a common goal.
Having things like community gardens are one awesome way to get people involved, to get people out and active in the community, and you see your community in a different way. When you're out in the garden, you see the environment a different way. You interact with your neighbors in a different way.
Cahill's involved because we think it's really important to partner with the community. We feel like the Garden Day is really something, a really good, worthwhile opportunity to do that.
I love giving back. I love doing volunteer work, as I was a part of Sunnydale. I used to live in Sunnydale 25 years ago.
We're trying to create as many different conduits between the community and these physical spaces to get people to come out, to be able to connect to it and feel like it's theirs and that it's a place where they feel safe to be.
We're in San Francisco, specifically Sunnydale area, and what we're doing today is we're bringing people together to clean up the community and adding value to people's lives.
We want to show the love and the respect of the community through outreach and just basic cleaning up the community and just show the community we do care about them.
I'm gonna be cutting hair. So I'm a barber myself, so I'm devoting my time, my skill to, the kids here are gonna get backpacks, start the school year with a nice, fresh cut.
What are we giving out today? Backpacks, that's right. And are they gonna be empty backpacks? No, they're gonna be full of good things. Just like each one of you are full of good things. I want to thank Mercy Housing who's helping me help you rebuild all of the housing around here. And we in San Francisco want you to be healthy and smart and have the best opportunities as possible. That's why these backpacks are important.
And if we all could do a little bit, it could change a lot for everyone else.
We always hear people tell us that what we can't do, you're not going to be able to do it. Right now, it's not an option to go to college. So we want to start putting that option back in their mind.
There are some territorial issues between Sunnydale and Lower Viz Valley.
It's been going on for over 20 years. The kids from Sunnydale never been down here, and the kids from the Towers never been up there. So now they done been everywhere.
In this program, what I did over the summer, it's just normal things. It's just showing us how to be like grown-ups, showing us a better way.
This program meant a lot to me because it's two communities coming into one. At the end of the day, we're a whole bunch of group of kids who made friends, who see the best in each other.
So the new development is going to include a new neighborhood hub, and that's our nickname for a place where the whole community, including the Sunnydale residents as well as the wider neighborhood, can come together to enjoy a new gymnasium for sports and exercise, classes, the Boys and Girls Club, childcare, neighborhood retail with healthy eating establishments. So the vision is that this hub be a place where neighbors get to enjoy the neighborhood amenities and be able to meet each other and connect with each other.
All right, I promised it was going to be brief, and you might not have believed me, but now you might. So, part of the point of the evening tonight is, a lot of this stuff is actually really complex, and the technical difficulties are there, and the difficulty of getting money together is there, and all the other things that you're probably more familiar with. I think I want to bring up Mark Joseph, and before I do, I just want to say, I think what is hardest about Hope SF are the things that really plague us as a society at large. And when Mercy and Related and the rest of the developers that decided to work on Hope SF decided to take this on, I can tell you that for most of us, the technical stuff was not nearly as scary as the broader issues that really divide us as a country and divide us even within San Francisco. And so intense issues related to poverty, race, that you don't solve simply by being an affordable housing developer or being a great architect or by being a great contractor. And so for us, I think the real challenge and the reason why the support is so critical is because these aren't things that get overcome quickly. And they don't get overcome by new paint or a new playground. They get overcome by relationships and people working every day and trying to break down boundaries and connect to people in ways that we don't often do. And I think most of us can see if you pick up the paper on any given day in America, you're not seeing as much of the good news that we're trying to spread at Sunnydale. Well, that's it. You're not seeing as much of the good news that we're trying to do at Sunnydale. I don't know where I was going with that. There was a comparison there, but I don't know where it went. So to help us along this path, we've talked to a lot of folks, and we've been to a lot of places around the country. We took a trip just recently to Chicago with about, it seemed like half our staff. It really wasn't. But again, just to see how people are doing it around the country. And we visited certain places, and one of the things we've learned over the years is that we really need people to provide us with an outside perspective and to kind of help us see what we're not seeing about ourselves and what we need to learn about other folks. Sometimes that feels like a very un-San Francisco thing, to look outside and assume that somebody outside of our city might actually be doing it better, or at least doing it in a way that helps us get some perspective on it. And so that's really what Mark has been able to do for Mercy and Related, as well as the broader Hope SF group. So Mark is the founding director of the National Initiative on Mixed Income Communities at Case Western Reserve University. He was an Olympic ping pong player? Yeah, no. I believe he could have been if his career hadn't been cut short by injury. But he is, you can ask him about it later. It's a very unusual story. But he's really part of our team. He's gotten to know a lot of residents, our staff, the people working on this. He's really part of the advocacy work around this. And what's great about Mark is he combines cutting-edge research that he does in his academic setting with very grounded work as a social justice advocate and now as a practitioner in a different way, working with us on really trying to change the way we think about doing this type of work. He's the co-author of Integrating the Inner City, The Promise and Perils of Mixed Income Public Housing Transformation, and he holds degrees from Harvard, the University of Chicago, and was a visiting scholar at Oxford. And after Mark speaks, we'll have a little discussion and Q&A, and we can all get into it. So with that, Mark Joseph.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Doug, for that introduction. I am very, very, very excited to be in a room full of supporters of an organization that I have come to really love, adore, admire, and frankly be grateful for. So I think my job tonight is really to thank you and encourage you to continue supporting Mercy. And I think after we get a chance to talk, you'll have a sense of why the work they are doing, certainly in Sunnydale, but across the board in terms of affordable housing, is just critical for this moment in our country. So you are putting your support in the right place, and please keep it going. I want to thank Doug, who has become really a brother in this work. I met him almost 10 years ago when I was invited out to first begin advising in California and in the Bay Area. And Doug, I think most of all, the way he brings and combines his sense of humor with a deep seriousness about getting this work done with a different level of excellence and quality. And so just when you're allowing yourself to kind of get into the humor and the funniness and laughing, he'll hit you with that kind of zinger about how do we take this work to the next level, which I've really appreciated. I think he's bringing out the A game in all of us. Let's give Doug a hand for his work. I mean, we're going to talk about Hope SF, and I assume most of the folks in the room are aware of this four-site transformation of public housing into mixed-income communities. Sunnydale, and I think there's no argument about this even among the other developers, is by far the most challenging site to take on. It also is by far the greatest opportunity, because with the scale that's going to be transformed out there, we literally have an opportunity to rebuild and transform an entire neighborhood in some pretty special ways, retaining the heritage, retaining the folks who are there, but taking it to a whole new level in terms of what you're going to hear me talk about, aspirations. So Mercy is taking on the toughest site. I also want to thank a couple other Mercy staff, Mary Kelly and Rick Sprague, who I know worked hard on this event. I threw them a little curveball today. I think we got our signals crossed, so they didn't realize I had a PowerPoint queued up that I wanted to show you all. And Mary was like, "Do you really need to do it?" And I was like, "Oh, I think it's gonna work." And so she's like, "All right," and she made it happen. So I really appreciate that, despite that curveball. Also, I want to give a shout out to the Sunnydale team who I've gotten over the last few months to work with very closely. My colleague and I were out there just this week, although I conveniently planned a meeting at the San Francisco Foundation while two of my other colleagues and these folks, and I still can't believe you did this, they were doing outreach for a new relocation opportunity, and I don't know, within 2 hours, 3 hours, they put door hangers on every single unit in the entire site of Sunnydale in one afternoon. So these folks are really serious about what they're doing, and I appreciate being invited into the family. Speaking of family, I actually have family in the room, so I'd like to introduce some family members to you. So my parents-in-law, Louis Labatt and Vera Labatt, are here this evening. They made the trek across the bay to come over, which I really appreciate. So I said to my wife, I'm like, maybe after they see me in this context, they're gonna finally, and my wife and I have been married, it's gonna be 21 years this year. I said, now that they're gonna see me at the Four Seasons, they're gonna feel like you made the right decision. And my wife, and if you met her, you'd understand, she was like, well, you can try. Couldn't hurt. But anyway, appreciate you all being there and all the support. And also good family friends, Joanna Johnson is here, and another family friend, Chris Amos, which is a name, listen to that name, Chris Amos. This young man is actually on his second career. This is becoming among the millennials. So he's done well enough that he's on his second career. He's a family friend, but he reached out to me and said, you know, I would like my second career to be one that really makes a difference for people. And guess what career he's decided to get into? He's getting into housing and affordable housing. Yes. Really, really excited about that. So Chris, I appreciate you being here. All right, without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about setting up some context, which again, I think most of the folks in the room would be familiar with. I want to share a little bit about what we've learned. I want to talk about our approach to this work, because my point is going to be we've got to take our game to another level. And then most importantly, I want to give you just some illustrations of the work that we're doing. So I want to put a lot out there and then leave plenty of time for us to have a conversation. So Doug started to set this up a little bit. I mean, it's now, you know, dinner table talk in our homes that we are at a true moment of reckoning for our country. And literally being faced with the, like, who are we anymore, right? What does it mean to be an American? Who gets to be an America? Where is America headed? My point to you this evening is that this work of building inclusive, thriving communities that are home to a mix of people. Again, just look at that Sunnydale table. You will see the mix, right? That's what we're trying to make happen across America. But a Sunnydale where you get to be intentional about who gets to live there, who you're marketing to. You get to be intentional about how that place works, how you design it, how you staff it, right? We have an opportunity in a space like that for, it's going to be ultimately thousands of people living there, to demonstrate a different kind of America, one that it feels to me moving backwards from. So while this work that's being done by Mercy is absolutely about finance, and it's about construction, and it's about relocation, and it's about property management, and it's about resident services, what I told the staff yesterday at their retreat, their work is also about society building. Society building. And they have an opportunity to demonstrate. And you imagine going to community meetings at Sunnydale, you literally see that's what the tables look like. But we have a challenge, because we've got a bunch of folk who we need to make sure can stay there, and we've got a bunch of folk we need to attract to come there, and then once we're there, we need that to work in a different way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more of the story of why I'm concerned, and if we just left it to its own devices, most likely it won't work the way that we're sitting here tonight hoping it will. So that's what this work is about. So it's about building the housing, getting people into homes, but it's about so much more than that. So for me, what gets me out of bed every morning, what my research is about, is really two big questions. How do we end the segregation of the urban poor? But the flip side of that, what are we trying to create for the urban poor to be a part of? We're trying to create racially and economically diverse communities that last. Many of the ones that we see in our country are fleeting. They're kind of moving in one direction or another. The trick that Mercy and all of us are trying to figure out is how do you create a community like that that will be stable and that will last the test of time, that will be durable. So this is our center. Doug told you a little bit about it, Case Western Reserve University. We're coming up on our 4th anniversary, November 7th. And after 13 years of research on mixed income, we really wanted to create a center of gravity, a place where people could go to, a one-stop shop. So if you have questions about mixed income communities, whether on the research side, on the how-to side, our center is a place that is there to be supportive, is there to be a resource. This just gives you a sense of where these mixed income communities and really mixed income developments of the Sunnydale type are around the country. When we started the center, no one had ever done a kind of count of how many of these things there actually were. And so we now have over 300 of them in our database, and you can get online and sort them and find out where they are and what are they doing in Atlanta and what are they doing in Austin. So we've provided that as a resource to the field. And then this map just gives you a sense of the different places we're working right now. And so we are really blessed in being able to work with a variety of developers and cities and housing authorities on this very same question of how do we create successful mixed income communities. You heard from Doug, we've produced a number of research products. So if you are interested in delving deeper, those are there. And you heard about the book, Integrating the Inner City. And then this is just some flashes of our consulting work. I couldn't resist. I put one in from, this is just yesterday with the Mercy team. Doug had invited me and we did a race equity workshop. So we had about 55, 60 Mercy staff members really drilling down on the issue of racial equity and how to understand it and how to promote it. But this is, for me, the fun part of the work, right? This is the payoff from the research. The research is where we learn what could have been done differently, what should have been done. The consulting work is where you get to get in on the front end. And that's what gets me so excited about the work with Mercy, because we literally are getting to walk with them day to day and think with them as they design buildings and think about staffing and write job descriptions and engage community members. So it's the work we really appreciate. So we're aiming for mixed income success. But one of the things we've learned is that there is no one definition. And in some senses, there shouldn't be one single definition. It depends on the community where you are, the city that you're in. But very often we find that the teams that are working on a particular development haven't developed a single statement, a single focus on what they're trying to achieve. So one of the things we've done to share the field is come up with at least a framework for mixed income success. So I want to share it with you now. It starts out, and at the very least, you need to transform the site. So the hope is that you're going to transform it into one of these gorgeous looking sites, and I have every confidence that when you go out to Sunnydale, that's what you're going to see, and Bill Whittier is going to get us started off with the first building that's going to be built. But it's not just about the site. The hope is also that the neighborhood around that site will transform. And so in the case of Sunnydale, we want to see a thriving Sunnydale, but also a thriving Viz Valley. Again, economically mixed, racially mixed, where people can get a different kind of trajectory in life. But part of the challenge that we see around the country is that as sites transform and as neighborhoods transform, those who are living there don't get to stay, and they get displaced. And we see that over and over again. As I told the Mercy team yesterday, the median rate of return nationally for these mixed income developments is 18%. 18%. 18% of families get to come back to these new developments and be a part of it. And believe me, HUD is at the front of saying that's wrong. That's a problem. We happen to be in a city, and we happen to be a part of an initiative that has staked its name on achieving a very, very different return rate. And the goal for Hope SF, and certainly the goal at Sunnydale, is as close to 100% as can be achieved, will be achieved. And again, I have every confidence that we're going to do that. This is an opportunity for some families to decide to move to another area of the city, and we want to make sure that they move successfully and that they thrive. But we certainly want to have far, far, far more than 18% of families living there. And so we want to avoid the displacement. We also have to attract and retain other families. This has turned out to be a challenge. I'm going to come back to that in just one second. And we also want to make sure that we're not just building housing, but we're building a strong community. And we're building housing for a vast range of individuals and families coming from very, very, very different walks of life. And so we've got an opportunity in front of us to say, how do you make a community that works with folks who are coming from such different walks of life? That's the challenge that sits ahead of us. And then finally, we're building this housing and these communities not so that people will stay poor and dependent and needing assistance of one form or another, but so that they use that stable, beautiful housing as a platform for a different kind of trajectory in their lives. That's the payoff. That's ultimately what this is about. All right, so that's the goal. Let me tell you how we're doing real quickly. Very, very well. We know how to transform sites. Again, I have every confidence you're going to be looking at some gorgeous housing coming out of the ground there. The research also shows that when you redevelop a site, you redevelop that neighborhood, that there begins to be more public and private investment in the broader neighborhood. So I also have every confidence that we're going to see a different moving Viz Valley, and that's already happening on its own a little bit. This is going to be a boost. We've talked already about displacement being a challenge, and also attracting and retaining. In some cases, it's actually been pretty easy, easier I think many of us might expect, to attract someone paying market rate prices to rent or to buy in one of these mixed income sites. We've proven around the country that can be done. The challenge is to have them stay. The challenge is to keep them. And if, as I said, we're trying to build a community, well, you can't build a community where you've got one set of folks who are there for as long as they can be and another set of folks who are churning. And we talked yesterday, maybe we'll come back to it today, about this question of, well, how long should we be expecting the public housing families to stay in these new developments? Should it be our goal that they stay here, this is permanent for them? Should it be our goal that this is a stepping stone for them? It's actually a really interesting question to debate a little bit, so we can talk about that. Here's where we're doing really badly. And here's where I'm excited to be digging in with Mercy and the Sunnydale team in really trying to push the envelope. In terms of building a strong community, instead of seeing these mixed income neighborhoods around the country figure out how to come together as neighbors, we're seeing an us versus them mentality being carried over into the new places. Are you a market renter or a public housing resident? Are you an owner or a renter? What race are you? What part of town did you come from? And so we've got our work cut out for us to overcome that stigma, to make sure that in these developments, we don't simply recreate what we're all looking at around our country and saying that's not the America that we think we're trying to have as a nation. So again, we have an opportunity to do something very, very different, but we're going to have to be far more intentional about it. And then finally, the other challenge is promoting upward economic mobility, that we're seeing sites after site around the country where even though residents have been able to return, those lucky ones who are in the 18%, they're still living in pretty precarious month-to-month economic situations. They've got beautiful housing. They will show you their apartments. They will tour you around their community with great, great pride. But when you ask them, tell me how things are going for you, suddenly it's a different story. So we're going to have to redouble our efforts to make sure that, and again, the theme of the evening, home is just the beginning. The housing is just the beginning. We've got to raise the higher bar. So what is that higher bar going to look like? It's going to look like, number one, we're going to build amazing housing, and we're going to be very thoughtful about its design to make sure that it is an open design so that our market rate buildings and our subsidized buildings and our for sale buildings and our rental buildings, number one, you can't tell them apart. They're all built to a level of quality, that it's a seamless neighborhood. But number two, we don't make the mistakes that others have made around the country of fencing one off for another. Centennial Place in Atlanta, I don't know if anyone has been to Centennial Place. It blew my mind. The for sale housing is literally gated off from the rental housing on that site. You need a special code to go get to be where the owners are on that site. So I know that's not what we're going to be doing here, but we're going to have to pay special attention. So that's the housing. But beyond that, we got to pay special attention to making sure that every resident, regardless of income, regardless of race, feels like they belong, feels like they are connected, feels like they are wanted in the community. And our research shows that left to its own devices, that's not what happens in these places. that the feeling of unwelcome that we have in our country right now and in our society just gets reproduced in this development. But here we have control. We have some power. We have some influence. So it can be different. And then finally, we want to make sure that folks are economically mobile and changing their financial situation. And so those, I think, are the three key ingredients we need to be talking about. All right, so we are researchers, we do consulting, but we knew if we were going to help take this bigger push, we needed other partners. And so we reached out to some of my favorite community builders in the country, trusted space partners, and we have entered into a joint venture that we call Triple Aim Impact. And so what you're looking at here is how we came to the name Triple Aim and some of the partners there. And so we're working together in cities across the country to do this level of work. Our assessment for Hope SF is that there are a lot of excellent, important pieces in place. The housing, resident services, resident programming, property management. But there's two key ingredients that we do not see named as part of the goal or named as anyone's responsibility. And our argument is that these actually should be everyone's responsibility. So one of those is aspirational relationships. We've talked to a lot of folks who say, my role is to do outreach to residents. My role is to get residents to come to meetings. My role is to make sure that residents have information. My role maybe is to connect community members. But when we talk about making sure that these communities are replete, are filled with relationships that are aspirational, relationships where people are motivated, inspired to bring out their best selves, that a conversation with you, that watching what you do, watching how you treat your kid, is actually calling me to be better in my own household. And please hear me when I say aspirational across all income levels. I think we can easily hear a statement like that and start thinking, yeah, we need those market rate folks to be the role models for these low-income households. And you can't be blamed for thinking like that. We have an entire society that is planting that into our heads every day. But we have to start thinking about what are the ways in which these low-income households who have been so incredibly resilient to be still standing after the generation's worth of what Sunnydale has done to them. The isolation, right? So there is a level of beauty and richness and resilience that we can all learn from, and we get to learn from, right? Who are out there on the ground learning that every day. What we have to do is get better at helping everyone realize there's something to be learned. Yes, these are families to be supported. Yes, these are families who have trauma and needs, in some cases desperate, but every single family, every single child has something to offer. That's not how they feel right now today. And that's not what they're being told in school tomorrow. And that's not necessarily how they're being treated by even family and neighbors. But with Mercy and Related, and what we're about to do at Sunnydale, we have an opportunity to change all of that. And that's the kind of work that we're engaged in with the Sunnydale team, is starting to do that on a day-by-day basis. So aspirational relationships. The other key ingredient is a sense of self-agency. A sense that I can influence my life. I have a say over my life. I have a say over my family's life. I have a say in my community. I have a voice. My voice matters. Again, unfortunately, we've done a really effective job as America and as a society in stripping that sense of agency away from a segment of our population. And regardless of your politics, it's hard to argue that that's not what's going on again right now, is having certain groups feel like you don't have as much to say as others do. You don't count as much as others do. Again, inclusive mixed income community building is an opportunity to do something very different. At a small scale, demonstrate that it works. And I think our theory of change is you do it in one place and you start to demonstrate it, you start to show something that people wouldn't believe could happen, right? So these are the two ingredients. All right, how How do you do that? You do that by finding folks. We talk a lot about stewards, people who will be stewards of this new work, not just leaders, but stewards. We talk about building a network, not a tenants council necessarily, not a new organization, but a network that's easy to access, easy to be a part of. So we're very into community network building. That's a strategy that we like to use. We talk about changing the narrative, right? We all are sitting here tonight with a certain narrative about Sunnydale. I'm just going to call out my beloved father-in-law, but he saw the handout and he said, oh, wait a second, is this the Sunnydale? There used to be a Sunnydale that were these projects. Is this the same Sunnydale? That's what folks across the Bay Area are thinking when they hear Sunnydale. There's a narrative that plays, there's a story about Sunnydale. Here's the worst part. That narrative about Sunnydale is playing in the minds and heads of the children of Sunnydale. That's the tough part. That's the tough part. That's the job we have, right? Because you could change everyone else's narrative, and we haven't solved the problem because we've been so effective at planting into the heads of young black children, be they at Sunnydale or wherever else, or young Samoan children or young Latino children. You're not quite as welcome here as everybody else. You're not quite as valued here as everybody else. That's now implanted, right? So the success stories we see, we have to realize what they've had to overcome to convince themselves, no, actually, you know what? I am important, I am valued, I am going to achieve at a different level. But again, when we take on a mixed income community, we have an opportunity to do that at a scale, if we think about it that way. Or we can just think about it as housing and shelter, which is really important, particularly in the city, particularly in the state. But again, the theme here is that home is just the beginning. There's much, much, much more we can do with this transformation. We have to be intentional and proactive. You heard me say that a number of times. And marketplace exchanges. How do we get residents exchanging with each other? Not always looking necessarily to a service provider or the city or someone else. How do we get back to folks being able to look at each other as a way to solve it? All right, I'm going to close by just showing some examples. This just gives you a visual when it's up and running. Some of this, what I'm talking about, can sound a little bit airy-fairy. For us in our work at Triple Aim, we boil it down into very specific things that happen every day, every week, very specific routines and practices. One of them is Network Night, and this is a new type of meeting that's been designed by my colleagues Bill Traynor and Frankie Blackburn. You're seeing pictures up here of a Network Night simulation. You might recognize some people in the room. Network Night is very, very different from your typical community meeting. You walk in and there's color and vibrancy and music and excitement, and people are in circles, and the evening is really designed and shaped to get people to connect with each other on a very different level. And the topic and agenda for the evening isn't set by somebody, some service provider or some city person. The agenda is set by whoever's in the room that night. It's a very emergent process. What do you all want to talk about tonight? What's important to you right now? Who wants to lead a conversation? It's called the table talk moment of the Network Night. So this is just one example of many different types of practices, some of which we've developed in other places, some of which we're going to be inventing together with the Sunnydale team. But to try to create a different kind of, and you probably saw the words up there, operating culture. How do we create a different operating culture, a different way of things working in this community so that we can truly have a thriving, inclusive, mixed income community? These are some of the places that my colleagues were working, and so some of these cities you all may also have worked in or lived in. We have a major project in Washington, D.C. It's called the New Communities Initiative, and in a way it's a sister initiative to Hope SF, 4 neighborhoods, 4 mixed income transformations. And so we've gotten to try out a few activities there, juice bars, tea talks, neighborhood walks that have a different kind of twist on them. And so we're going to be bringing some of those and sharing them with the Sunnydale team and having them put their twist on it. So that's going to be a really cool exchange. You've heard about Hope SF, and again, you might see some of the people in the room here. Some of these pictures are Sunnydale, and some of these are the other 4 sites. We'll come back to Hope SF a little bit. We're forming a national network along with two major partners, the Center for the Study of Social Policy in DC and Urban Strategies out of St. Louis. And we're going to be having 8 to 10 exemplary places around the country join in a peer network to see if we can also have a peer learning strategy to push some of this work forward. So we call that the Mixed Income Innovation and Action Network. We're also working in Ferguson. And many of you have been following the events there, and we just had, last couple weeks, things flare up in St. Louis again. So this is where Michael Brown was killed, was actually in an assisted housing development. Very isolated, very familiar story, and so we're on the ground in Sunnydale with our partner, in Southeast Ferguson with our partners doing some of this work. This is a block from my school, and I'm really proud of this project. When we learned that the community builders had bought this building and was going to be transforming it into a mixed income building, and we already had a relationship, I was able to call up the CEO and say, we're a block away from your building and we want to be all in, embedded. And so this is where we get to do the tightest touch. We've got social work students placed in the building. We have partners from around the community, and so we're really getting to have a very hands-on on this particular project. And then finally, one of the projects I'm most excited about is our Effective Neighboring project. And we wanted to look outside of the public housing mixed income development space just on a regular block. And we wanted to go down to the block level, and we wanted to really understand, when you've got a diverse block, what kind of things can you do to get the neighbors there to connect with each other in different ways? And so we're doing that. We're doing interventions on 2 different blocks for over a year, and we're going to be tracking and learning how some of those things work and then bringing that back into the mixed income space. So I think with that, I thank you for your patience, and I'll love to take some questions and comments. Thank you.
So, Dr. Joseph, I'm a board member. My name is Tim Murray, Mercy Housing of California. Since you are so well educated, I would like you to address the division right now in education in this country and the kind of like the light bearers like Marva Collins and Jaime Escalante in ravaged neighborhoods that were in, gang-infested neighborhoods, and that actually brought young people to a place of educational excellence, and how that might also be interwoven. Right now we see a real division with the current administration on charter schools and public schools. And I was brought up in a pretty wealthy community in Southern California where the public schools and the high schools and the elementary schools had masters and PhDs teaching, and I wasn't from a wealthy family. And I see the division and the lack of entry into the mobility economically as a big problem educationally in this country. So given your educational background, I would ask if you could address this of what we're trying to achieve at Sunnydale.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Usually education comes up as one of the last questions of the evening, and that's always tough because there's so much to say about it. So thank you for, it's almost like a plant that you said that, raised that issue first. Okay, so here's the bottom line. We've failed in the mixed income space to take advantage of the natural synergy between housing and education as twin strategies for mobility. You look at a Chicago that had the transformation of all its public housing going on at the very same time as something called Renaissance 2010. They were going to create 100 community schools. Those two initiatives were running at the very same time, never talked to each other. And we see this in community after community. Now, the San Francisco story is a particularly tough one. I was out at Hunter's View today. We're walking around, and the property manager happened to mention that the kids of Hunter's View, and it's probably a similar story at Sunnydale, guess how many kids it's only about 200 kids, 300 kids? How many schools those kids go to? Right? 30? Higher. 50. Higher. 80 schools. 80 schools. Now, the beautiful side to this story, is San Francisco, progressive city, you have a school choice approach. You are not limited to go to your neighborhood school. You might guess that me, as a place-based guy, I believe that place is a key part of solutions to social challenges, would say, wait a second, how do we moderate that a bit? Yes, we want to give some people choice, but to answer your question, if we do not figure out how to have schools be a part of this solution, I don't think we win. I don't think we get there without it. So I don't think that we have to do away with school choice. I think the way we could come at this, and some of you may be supporting right now, is how do we put our money and support and resources and accountability into the schools in these areas with the equal force that we're putting it into getting awesome housing and awesome services and awesome community. We can't hope that the schools come along, because in most cases they don't. We can't be deterred by the fact that it's an entirely different system with a whole other set of politics and incredibly challenging to influence. It's taken a long time, but I've been at the table with Hope SF agency directors, and I've seen the representative of the San Francisco Unified School District telling his own narrative about how he's come to understand this differently. And he's come to understand how Hope SF housing transformation is doing his work, stabilizing the kids and having peer outreach and having health outreach and having walking clubs to walk is doing the work of the school. And so we naturally go into our silos, and that's one of our big challenges. That's a massive one that we need to bust, is the school housing one. So I'm very, very glad you raised that question. There's a lot more to say on that, but let me stop at that.
I'm coming over there, but I just want to put in a shameless plug, which is we're doing another project with Bill, who had to take off, but in Sacramento. And there it's a very different setup, but we actually have put our Mercy staff in the school instead of in the housing. And the idea was very much like what Mark said. And so we have 3 staff people working out of an elementary school for this exact reason, because they're closer to the issue of the school in that way.
Hi, I'm Brian Swift. I'm a Mercy Housing California board member. And my question is surrounding the statistics that you mentioned about the general outcome of the transformation of these types of projects like Sunnydale is only 18% retention. And then when you look at the objective of having, you know, we're going to transform this into a community, and that means a safe community. And so in that transition, how do you deal with, I mean, to have a safe community, you have to get rid of the gangs, you have to get rid of criminals, you have to do a lot of transformation within that community in order to achieve the objective that you're talking about. And you mentioned about, you know, in your presentation all these things, but they have to start very early, or you're not going to make a lot of headway over that 18%.
Mm-hmm. So the easiest way to do this would be to simply, and there are places that have done this, right? Atlanta had an 8% return rate. So Atlanta as a city, and they were the first ones to get into this back in 1992, 93, basically had an approach that you just move everyone out and you start over. That's an approach you could take. That might in some ways be the easiest approach. The research shows that for those families that you've moved away, 2 things. Number one, for the most part, they do not move to better communities, lower poverty communities. They move from one high poverty community to another. And secondly, they don't thrive from that move. And in fact, in a lot of cases, they feel isolated. They've been cut off from social networks, and they're cut off from the organizations that were around them. But again, that is one approach. That's not the approach this city has taken, and I applaud this city for that. You're right in the sense of keeping as close to 100% of the people that you have there. While it certainly means keeping 100% of the awesomeness that you have there, And believe me, it's hard to say, but come on out. Sunnydale team would be happy to show you. There are some incredible people in this community that we can all learn from. So keeping 100% means we keep as many of them as possible, but to your point, it also means we keep a lot of challenges. Now, for me, my personal belief is I wouldn't necessarily call a person a criminal and label them as that, like they're a criminal, they're always a criminal, they've always been a criminal, they were born a criminal, they're always going to be a criminal. They certainly may be doing some criminal activity. And so then that raises a question for us, right? Do we think there's hope for that person? Do we think that person should have a chance to live in a community like this? Do we maybe think that if that person lived in a community like this, that would help them move off of the criminal activity that they've been a part of? I don't know, and we could certainly debate that. But I know where I'm coming from is loving the fact that this city and this organization that we're supporting tonight is taking the point of view of everyone who's there now deserves a chance to make another start when this community is transformed. You are absolutely right. That's the harder way to go. Ultimately, I think it's the right way to go. Ultimately, I think it's actually not just pushing the problem around, right? Because as you said, you could get rid of the criminals, get rid of the gangs, let's just push them somewhere else. I'm not sure what we've solved if you take my point that what we're after here is not just housing in Sunnydale, but we're actually trying to build a society. We're trying to solve a bigger problem. So my point of view, and again, we could completely debate this. My point of view would be let's keep folks there. Let's build the relationships. You mentioned starting early. You're absolutely right about that. Let's catch these kids as early as we can. But let's not give up on the folks who, for generations, as I was going to say, for generations have been given up on. It's not that. They've been forcibly marginalized. The investments have been forcefully prevented from going into their communities. This didn't just happen, right? Decisions were made that led to a Sunnydale being what a Sunnydale is. So Theo Miller, the director of Hope SF, it's very provocative, but he calls this a reparations initiative. Now, I'm sure everyone in the room has a different reaction to hearing that phrase, but that's what he calls it. He's the director, right? So at least raises a question, wait, reparations? Reparations for what? What does that mean? I think it means second chance, right? And I think, my sense is, and I'm pretty convinced that's what Mercy's going for. I think it's the right way to go, but you're absolutely right. It is a hard path. This is not the easy choice that's being made by Mercy.
There he goes.
Sue Diamond, also a Mercy California board member over here.
Hello.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of a community center or community centers in your vision of thriving communities, and not so much building a beautiful building, which Mercy and Related I'm sure can do together, but what goes on in the community center? What are the important and key programs that make it a success to achieve your vision?
All right. So I am going to give a warning to Rami Dare that I'm going to put her on the spot. But see, I learned, because I put LaFou on the spot yesterday, and I didn't give her any warning. So Rami, you're going to get a warning. The mic is going to come to you in a second. But I'm going to take a first shot at that. But if you saw the community hub diagram, we just had a meeting on Monday about this, and really starting some really great brainstorming among our teams about the community hub. So I know Rami's thought a lot about it, and we might even see if we can hear from the Sunnydale team. A community center is integral. But most things in a mixed income community, we have to think about differently than in other communities. For example, property management in a mixed income community is very different than property management in an all affordable or all luxury community. Likewise, a mixed income community center is a very different proposition. And unfortunately, I've seen far too many community centers in mixed income communities where the natural question, what do you think the natural question that residents have of all types, higher income, lower income, what's the question they ask about that community center? Who said it? Someone said it back here. What did you say? Who is it for? Isn't that an odd question? It's in the community. It's for the community. But time and time again, that's the instinctive question. Is that center for the low-income people? Is that a kind of social service-y, welfare-y type of thing? Or is that community center for the upscale folks, the yuppies, right? Where you're going to go in and you're going to be on your whatever cycle and get your latte. Like, so which one is it? So our challenge is it's both. And we need to do at least two things. One, we need to design it, and this is where Rami is going to have her hands on the levers. We have to design it. What does it look like? What's in there? How is it staffed? We have to design it in a way that appeals to everyone. So it's got to have a variety of activities. It's got to have a variety of resources, and it's got to be welcoming across the board. That's number one. But we also got to get out there and convince people it's for everybody. Because if we don't do that work, someone's going to be the first one to go, man, this community center is pretty cool. We're going there. And once you get a critical mass of one group, it gets harder for the other group to be there. So, Rami, you got a 1-minute countdown. So, I was out at Hunter's View today. I was at Hunter's View today, and that's one of the Hope SF sites. And I actually toured, I had my little, if I could show you on my phone, I had my little hard hat on and went into Block 10. So Block 10 is their building where they're going to have their community hub. This is my first chance to go in there. And pretty incredible. You go in and they've got all the sign nameplates. If I had time, I would have put that in my presentation. You see the gym, you see the health center, you see the case management room, you see the resident lounge, you see, what else did they have? Beautiful open kind of space. But when we talked to the staff and the property manager, and we said, how are you feeling about this? This is great, this is really exciting. And she said, yeah, but you know, I had a meeting of all the providers, and I shared with them my vision of this being an integrated center where they're all kind of working together. And she said they just looked at me with blank stares. It was like, wait a second, I'm here to do the health center, and I'm here to run the gym, and I'm going to do case management. And again, people falling into these different roles. Our triple aim impact philosophy is you got to bust down those silos, and you got to work incredibly hard, harder than usual in the mixed income community, to have those things integrated. So community centers are integral, but there's a lot of work that has to be done. All right, we are going to hear from Rami. She's declining?
She indicated that she wasn't. All right. Wait, I think we have time for one more question.
You'll corner. So Rami's right here. Corner her later. Because I know she has. No, your board member will corner her later.
So I think, Sue, thank you for asking the question. I think what we wanted to make sure you all know is, and you've been looking at the boards when we were back at that reception room where all the refreshments were, there's some boards there that will illustrate to you our vision for this new community hub that we hope to create at Sunnydale. So 1,700 units, yes, all new streets and utilities, but we also hope to provide a place where there are open spaces, there's a new community center, there's a new gymnasium, there's neighborhood retail, all these activities that really provide amenities for the residents of Sunnydale, the new and the old, as well as the wider Viz Valley neighborhood, and for visitors. We really want this to be a place-making hub and really put Viz Valley and Sunnydale on the map. And all the things that Mark was describing in terms of our hopes for how people will actually be using the space and actually get to know each other and meet each other is exactly what we're hoping. And it's going to be hard work, and we really hope that you'll be able to help us think through that and help us think about what kinds of creativity and resources we can apply to make sure that vision is real. Thanks.
Well,
this is
David
Fernandez, everyone.
I certainly didn't expect to say anything about the hub, but I think one of the things that's going to be critical about the hub is that it offers amenities that every other well-versed San Francisco neighborhood has, right? This community has been so isolated physically, economically, socioeconomically, that we're trying to make sure that they are able to take advantage of a lot of the rich amenities that the city has to offer the rest of its residents. So we're working very hard to make sure that hub, and it's strategically placed to bring the entire community together. It's right at the edge of Sunnydale, and we're hoping that it works that way.
Thank you, David and Rami.
So what David said is interesting because we went, I think, early in this initiative to visit 5 different cities to look at how they built community centers. And the only thing I remember all of us agreeing on was that the only ones that worked were built at the edge of the old public housing and the existing neighborhood that was around it, because that was the signal that it belonged to both sides. And so that's the reason why the Sunnydale Hub is built at the intersection of the broader Visitation Valley and Sunnydale. So one last question, and then we're going to let you go have some cocktails.
Here's a quick quiz on the community center to just close the loop. Why is the community center, not only at Sunnydale, but at all of these Hope SF sites in San Francisco, why is the community center even more important than in another city? There's something about the design of these mixed income communities. There's something about the level of mix that's not designed into these communities in San Francisco. So in San Francisco, you won't have market rate and subsidized apartments in the same building. Whereas in some buildings, in some cities, you have for sale, rental, mixed in the same building. That's not an approach. We're going to have separate buildings, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's very complex to finance and make it happen. So a certain level of integration is not going to be happening in the buildings in San Francisco. So your question is so apt. It's even more important that you have other spaces where that integration is happening.
Okay, thanks. My name's Bridget Basham, and I'm from HKIT, one of the designers there. My question is in relation, I think, to business ownership and entrepreneurship. I understand firsthand that one of the largest obstacles for women and minorities entrepreneurs is the cost or obstacles to obtaining brick and mortar or places to lease and rent as they emerge their businesses or look to expand. And I was just kind of curious, and perhaps it's in the community center, but the kinds of provisions or allowances that are being made for those kinds of opportunities at Sunnydale.
So it's a great question. It's actually for you all. Yeah, Doug, do you want to take that one? I think it's really important.
I'm not totally sure I understood the question, but it's about having spaces for businesses and opportunities. So we do have an expectation that we're going to create some very, very low cost retail space at Sunnydale, and part of our rationale is that it's going to be very hard to get people to sell fresh produce and healthy food if we're telling them that we don't want them to base their business plans on selling cigarettes and booze. Not that there's that much wrong with booze, but I mean that is a challenge for us as we look to kind of try and create a healthier spot. But for us, philosophically, the goal, and if you have been lucky enough to see some of our properties around the city, you'll see that we almost always lease our spaces to locally owned businesses. And so that's a philosophical thing for us about creating great, vibrant neighborhoods that don't seem like every other neighborhood in the world. And I don't think at the moment we have a ton of expectations around like micro-enterprise spaces or things like that, but that may emerge over time. And so I'm not sure if that's an exact answer to your question, but that's sort of where we are. So if you would just join me for a second, especially because his family's here, we want to make it sound like Mark did a great job. All right. Thank you, Mark. You did do a great job. And thank you very much. For us, we're really trying to build a community of folks that understand what we're trying to do and can stick with us and provide ideas like the one you just offered to us. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. I hope we can count on all of you as we move forward for both ideas and support in other ways. We're really, really hoping that this thing starts to move and accelerate. And as San Franciscans or people who are really concerned about the work that is happening, I hope this was interesting to you. I hope it's provocative. If you have further questions, I'll give you Mark's home cell phone number. He's available anytime. I mean, he's in a different time zone. You can get him really early in the morning. No, but thank you so much. Thanks again to Mark and the rest of his family and to the folks that put this on for Mercy. And thanks to all of you. And I hope you linger for a little bit. There's some great dessert. And we thank you for coming out.